The Knights Templar stand as one of the most enigmatic organizations to ever exist in the medieval era. Like the mythical phoenix, their rise commenced amidst the flames of war for the Holy Land, only to conclude at the inquisitorial stake, leaving behind mere ashes of legends and conjecture. Initially, they presented themselves to the world as humble monk knights, their primary mission being to protect pilgrims venturing to venerate holy sites. However, akin to a seed sown in fertile soil, their influence burgeoned, and in a mere century they metamorphosed into a formidable power, instilling trepidation in kings and even the Roman pontiffs themselves. An aura of mystery and suspicion perpetually enshrouded the Templars. They faced accusations of heinous sins, heresy, blasphemy, engaging in clandestine rituals, and even devil worship. But how truthful were these allegations? Or perhaps, was it all a meticulously orchestrated smokescreen, designed to conceal entirely different, far more mundane reasons for their sudden and brutal annihilation? Unlike ordinary knights, whose motivations were honor, glory, or the expansion of landholdings, the Templars embodied something far greater, something transcending conventional understanding. They were warriors of God, yet they answered to no earthly king. They fused the traits of monks, dedicating themselves to serving higher powers with those of formidable warriors, wielding command over some of the deadliest armies of the Middle Ages. Vowing poverty, they nonetheless possessed immeasurable riches, rumored to be hidden in the deep dungeons of their castles and temples, continuing to ignite the imaginations of treasure hunters to this day. Subscribe to our channel if you have not already, as many more interesting videos await you, and we shall continue onward. But why did the Order of the Templars, in particular, become a symbol of secrets, conspiracies, and vanished relics, overshadowing all other military orders of that era? Indeed, numerous similar organizations existed at the time, such as the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, or the Knights of St. Lazarus, each contributing to history in their own right. Yet, it is the Templars who have been etched into the collective memory as guardians of the Holy Grail, bearers of secret knowledge, and ultimately victims of the greatest betrayal. What made them so unique, so alluring to all sorts of conspiratorial theories and mystical teachings? To unravel this complex question and grasp the origins of this captivating legend, we must journey back to early 12th century Europe, to a world where religion played a decisive role in shaping the destinies of nations, and knights unflinchingly marched to their deaths for Jerusalem. It was the era of the Crusades, an epoch of bloody wars, giving rise to both saints and villains, examples of incredible self-sacrifice and displays of inhuman cruelty. It was within this crucible of war that the Templars became both protagonists and principal victims, leaving behind a mark that endures to this day. What compelled them to wage war? And how did their bloody confrontation conclude? In the late 11th century, Europe stood on the cusp of momentous change, sensing the advent of a great upheaval. Fragmented kingdoms were perpetually at war with one another. Knighthood was gradually transforming into a privileged military elite, and the Catholic Church, eager to fortify its already considerable power, sought novel ways to amplify its influence. The authority of the Roman pontiff steadily ascended, yet the religious world was gripped by anxiety stemming from the fact that the Holy Land was under Muslim dominion, a situation deemed utterly unacceptable and offensive by the Christian world. The state of affairs underwent a radical shift in the year 1095, when the Council of Clermont convened, during which Pope Urban II delivered a speech that became the launching point for one of the grandest movements in medieval history. The Pope declared that Muslims not only possessed Jerusalem, but also oppressed the Christian populace, desecrated holy sites, and destroyed churches, converting them into mosques. His words, like a spark igniting dry tinder, ignited an unprecedented wave of religious fanaticism across Europe, encompassing all strata of society. But the matter was not confined to mere anger. Urban II promised the Crusaders something far greater, something destined to become the primary incentive for participation in the campaign. All who ventured to the Holy Land were promised complete absolution of sins, irrespective of the severity of the transgressions committed. This signified that any individual, be it a knight, peasant, or even a hardened criminal, could cleanse their soul and secure a place in paradise simply by participating in the crusade. The Roman pontiff's call resounded at the precise moment when Europe stood poised for such a development, when society harbored a yearning for change and an opportunity to unleash pent-up energy. Feudal lords, whose domains were confined, sought new lands to extend their influence. Knights craved fresh wars to glorify their names, and peasants yearned for deliverance from the poverty and hunger that had haunted them throughout their lives. For many, the crusade became a form of social mobility, a chance to fundamentally alter their destinies and break free from the vicious cycle of poverty and disenfranchisement. Thus, in the year 1096, the first columns of people, having sewn crosses onto their clothing as a token of readiness for the campaign, commenced their arduous journey eastward. It was an ungovernable torrent, comprised of thousands of individuals, most of whom possessed neither weapons nor sufficient experience in warfare. At the helm of this motley throng stood a fanatical preacher named Peter the Hermit, assuring all around that God himself would guide them to victory and protect them from any adversity. However, reality proved far harsher and more brutal than the naive crusaders had imagined. This horde of poorly armed and utterly unprepared individuals, entering history under the moniker of the People's Crusade, failed to even reach the Holy Land, encountering insurmountable obstacles along their path. Traversing the Balkans, they pillaged and destroyed everything in their wake, inciting the wrath of the local populace and sowing chaos and destruction. When they reached the borders of Byzantium, they became a veritable headache for the Christian emperor himself, who knew not how to rid himself of the uninvited guests. However, a genuine catastrophe awaited them ahead, an impending doom. In Asia Minor, they were met by a well-trained and organized Seljuk army, which, in a series of fierce battles, virtually annihilated the Crusader throng, leaving them no chance of salvation. Only small groups of survivors managed to reach Constantinople, where the emperor, heaving a sigh of relief, promptly dispatched them further onward, away from his city, to avert further troubles. However, following in their wake came genuine troops, representing a formidable military force. In the year 1097, the formation of armies of Western European knights commenced, comprised of well-trained and battle-hardened warriors. These were men accustomed to war, understanding full well that the campaign to the Holy Land was not merely a pilgrimage to holy sites, but a serious and perilous military endeavor, demanding meticulous preparation and discipline. Unlike the participants of the People's Crusade, they did not leave behind chaos and destruction, but sought to establish strict discipline, prepare for the forthcoming battles, and forge alliances with other armies. Among them were such renowned commanders as Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, and Bohemond of Taranto, battle-hardened warriors driven not only by religious motives, but also by their own military ambitions and personal interests. As their armies marched eastward, the Crusaders encountered an entirely different world, unlike anything they had witnessed before. Asia Minor was controlled by the Seljuks, representing a powerful and well-organized force, having inflicted a crushing defeat upon the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert. However, the Crusaders were no less dangerous adversaries, possessing high morale and determination to achieve their goal. They stormed cities, carved their way through hostile territories, overcame disease, hunger, and the enervating heat, but continued to advance steadily towards their objective, the Holy Land, stopping at nothing. Would they succeed in conquering the East? And what awaited them ahead? It was this meticulously planned and organized campaign that heralded the commencement of a long and eventful history of the Crusaders in the East, a history replete with glorious victories and bitter defeats. They arrived not as mere pilgrims yearning to venerate holy sites, but as a formidable army, intent not only on liberating Christian sanctuaries from the dominion of infidels, but also on firmly establishing themselves in these fertile lands, creating their own states and instituting their own orders. It was the first, yet decisive step towards the creation of the so-called Crusader states, scattered throughout the Middle East, and the emergence of the first military monastic orders tasked with safeguarding the interests of the Christian world in this turbulent region. Amidst the chaos, war, and religious fanaticism prevailing at the time, ideas were already germinating, which, in mere decades, would lead to the emergence of the most renowned and enigmatic knights of the Middle Ages, the Order of the Templars, whose name continues to stir the imaginations of historians and enthusiasts of secrets to this day. After years of grueling journey, countless battles, and immeasurable hardships, the Crusader army finally reached its cherished goal, for which they had striven for so long. They had traversed thousands of kilometers, endured bloody battles in Asia Minor, suffered from disease and hunger, but nothing could break their will and halt their advance. However, all this was but a prologue to the main trial that awaited them ahead: the siege and capture of Jerusalem, the sacred city, for which they had left their homes, risked their lives, and dreamt of eternal salvation. The city was the final and most important objective of the First Crusade, and for many, its capture signified the fulfillment of the oath given before God and the opportunity to earn forgiveness for all their sins. But when the exhausted and starving knights beheld the impregnable walls of the holy city, a harsh reality unfolded before them, far removed from their rosy perceptions. Ahead of them lay one of the most arduous sieges of their lives, fraught with dangers and unpredictable twists. At that moment, Jerusalem was under the control of the Egyptian Fatimids, a powerful Muslim dynasty that ruled Egypt and controlled significant territories in the region. The city was well fortified, its walls appeared unassailable, and the garrison consisted of experienced and battle-hardened warriors, ready to defend their faith and their city to the last drop of blood. The defenders understood perfectly well that the Crusaders would not retreat and would fight to the end. Therefore, they were prepared to stand to the death, sparing neither effort nor lives. The Crusaders found themselves in a dire and near desperate situation. The grueling heat, coupled with the severe lack of water and provisions, had transformed their encampment into a veritable hell, rife with disease and death. They were already losing men to sickness and thirst, and the army's morale was teetering on the brink of collapse. But retreat was not an option, for it would signify a betrayal of their faith and the loss of everything they had fought so long and hard for. Realizing that an assault on the city would be doomed to failure without powerful siege engines, the Crusaders began frantically gathering timber to construct siege towers and battering rams capable of breaching the thick city walls. However, this proved to be no easy task. The area surrounding Jerusalem was virtually devoid of trees suitable for construction, forcing the Crusaders to dismantle abandoned houses, search for timber in remote areas, and haul heavy logs under the scorching sun, suffering from thirst and exhaustion. Meanwhile, a religious fervor swept through the Crusader camp, fueled by the sermons of priests and the general atmosphere of anticipation for the decisive battle. The warriors observed a strict fast, prayed fervently, beseeching God for help and support, and then marched barefoot in a solemn procession across the sun-baked desert around the city, as if retracing the steps that, according to legend, the inhabitants of Jericho had taken before the walls of their city crumbled at the sound of trumpets. This ritual was intended to instill confidence in the Crusaders' hearts and demonstrate their sincere faith to God. The assault on Jerusalem began on July 14th, marking the culmination of a years-long campaign and the bloodiest battle in the history of the Crusades. For 2 days, the Crusaders desperately attacked the city walls, sparing neither effort nor lives, but the defenders repelled their attacks with incredible tenacity and resilience, giving the enemy no chance of a breakthrough. Only at dawn on July 15th, after 2 days of relentless fighting and immense losses on both sides, Did the Crusaders finally manage to break into the city through a breach in the wall created by a battering ram? This moment became both a moment of supreme triumph and horror, forever changing the course of history. As the Crusaders, intoxicated with victory and a thirst for vengeance, stormed into Jerusalem, a horrific massacre began, unlike anything seen before in history. The warriors, who had strived for years to reach this goal, overcoming all obstacles and hardships, now knew no mercy and spared no one who crossed their path. The city streets were filled with the blood of innocent inhabitants, and homes became death traps for civilians trying to escape the enraged Crusaders. Chronicles of the time describe scenes of unbelievable cruelty and violence that horrify even the modern reader, accustomed to the horrors of war. Swords could not cool down from the blood. The bodies of the slain were piled into enormous heaps, and blood literally flowed down the steps of the Temple Mount, staining everything around crimson. In the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a sacred place for all Christians, knights covered in blood up to their ankles knelt and thanked God for the victory he had granted them, feeling not the slightest remorse for what they had done. But what did this victory mean in the long run? Was it truly a blessing for the Christian world, or did it instead mark the beginning of a new era of conflict and bloodshed? The Crusaders naively believed that the Christian world would now own Jerusalem forever, and that their feat would forever be remembered by posterity. However, the massacre carried out in the city not only destroyed a significant portion of the Muslim and Jewish population, but also forever turned the Crusaders into hated invaders and barbarians in the eyes of the entire East. In the Islamic world, this tragic event became a symbol of Christian cruelty and inhumanity, and the idea of revenge for Jerusalem became forever ingrained in the minds of Muslim rulers and ordinary people, becoming one of the main causes of future conflicts and wars. From a military point of view, the Crusaders won an unconditional victory, capturing the Holy City and establishing their control over it. But from a geopolitical point of view, they made one of the biggest and most tragic mistakes in history, the consequences of which are still felt today. Instead of trying to strengthen alliances with local rulers or offer them some kind of compromise that would take into account the interests of both sides, they laid a solid foundation for future wars that would last for centuries, claim millions of lives, and bring immeasurable suffering to the peoples of the Middle East. Their triumph turned into the beginning of their own disaster, predetermining their future fate and marking the beginning of a long and bloody struggle for the Holy Land. Now, the Crusaders faced a new, no less difficult question: how to keep the conquered Holy Land in their hands and protect it from the inevitable Muslim counteroffensive. The warriors who came to Jerusalem could not remain forever in these distant and dangerous lands, far from their homes and families. Many of them already dreamed of returning home as soon as possible, taking with them everything they had been able to obtain during the campaign. But who would then defend the city and other Christian settlements? Who could maintain power in this dangerous and hostile region populated by hostile Muslims? Thus arose a new, revolutionary idea for that time. The idea of creating elite military monastic orders, whose members would be not just knights fighting for money and glory, but warriors of God, dedicating their lives to protecting the Holy Land and Christian pilgrims. And among the first such people were those who would soon be called the poor Knights of Christ, and the whole world would know them by the name of the Templars, shrouded in an aura of mystery and legend. Furthermore, the Crusaders found themselves surrounded by powerful Muslim states, whom they had mortally offended by destroying a significant portion of Jerusalem's population and desecrating their holy places. The Seljuks in Syria and the Fatimids in Egypt had no intention of leaving this loss unanswered and were determined to return the holy city to their control. They were gathering forces, forging alliances, and preparing for a powerful counterattack that would sweep the Crusaders off the face of the earth. However, the threat came not only from external enemies, but also from within, from the internal contradictions and problems that the Crusaders faced after the conquest of Jerusalem. Following the conquest of Jerusalem, thousands of pilgrims from all over Europe began flocking to the Holy Land, eager to see the Holy Sepulchre with their own eyes, to pray in the places where, according to legend, Jesus Christ himself had walked, and to touch the shrines about which they had heard so much. But their path to Jerusalem lay through territories that were far from safe and were controlled by hostile Muslim tribes and robber bands. Caravans of pilgrims often became targets for attacks, subjected to robbery and murder. Local tribes attacked defenseless travelers, taking gold, supplies, and other valuable property, and sometimes killing everyone without exception, sparing neither women nor children. Who would stand up to defend the pilgrims, and what would become of their noble mission? To leave Jerusalem without a reliable armed escort meant putting oneself in mortal danger and almost certainly becoming a victim of robbers or Muslim fanatics. The Crusaders, of course, tried to establish order in the territories under their control and ensure the safety of pilgrims, but their forces were woefully inadequate to solve this complex problem. The Crusader army was small, garrisons were scattered throughout the territory, and local residents treated them with distrust and hostility. Each new knight arriving from Europe was more of a mercenary eager for profit than a true defender of the Christian kingdom. He fought for himself, for his share of the spoils and glory, but not for the Holy Land and not for its defenseless inhabitants. In 1109, just 10 years after the conquest of Jerusalem, a group of knights, led by Hugh de Payens, proposed a very unusual and innovative initiative to King Baldwin II, which could radically change the situation in the region. They declared that they were ready to take responsibility for guarding the roads and protecting pilgrims, but not as ordinary mercenaries or vassals serving for money and land, but as monks who had taken a sacred oath of allegiance to God and were ready to dedicate their lives to serving the Christian faith. This was unheard of and contradicted all existing notions of the role of a knight and monk in society at that time. In those days, knighthood and monasticism represented two completely different worlds, almost never intersecting. Monks took vows of poverty, humility, and renunciation of violence, dedicating their lives to prayer and spiritual practices, while knights, on the contrary, lived by war and plunder, striving for glory, wealth, and power. But here, in the Holy Land, a completely new type of warrior emerged, combining the traits of a knight and a monk with a sword, ready to shed blood in the name of faith. They pledged to fight, but not for personal enrichment, but for the protection of Christianity and the salvation of souls. Baldwin II, appreciating the noble intentions of the knights and realizing the urgent need for protectors of the pilgrims, supported this unusual initiative and provided them with buildings located on the territory of the former Al-Aqsa Mosque, located on the Temple Mount. This place, according to ancient legends, was located on the site of the destroyed Temple of Solomon, and it was from here that the knights took their name. The Order of the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, or, as they soon became known, the Templars, whose name eventually became synonymous with secrets and mysteries. At first, the Templars could indeed be called poor, because they possessed neither wealth, nor lands, nor influential patrons at court. According to legend, in the early years of the order, their symbol became an image of two knights sitting on one horse, which symbolized their humility, poverty, and willingness to share everything equally. They lived on alms, wore simple white cloaks symbolizing the purity of their thoughts, and observed strict discipline, not allowing themselves any excesses or entertainment. Their mission was extremely dangerous and responsible: to patrol the roads, protect pilgrims from attacks, fight robbers and Muslim detachments making raids on Christian territories. But despite their ascetic lifestyle and modest income, the Templars had a great idea behind them, inspiring them to feats and helping them overcome any difficulties, to be defenders of Christianity, to live according to a strict charter, and to fight not for themselves, but for God and the salvation of souls. Gradually, rumors of these unusual knights, combining military valor and monastic humility, reached Europe, arousing genuine interest and admiration. The Templars began to attract the attention of noble families who saw in them not just warriors, but a new type of Christian hero, ready for any sacrifice for their faith. Over time, it became obvious that the Templars not only survived in this dangerous region, but also gained a reputation as the best defenders of the Holy Land, whose courage and resilience were unmatched. However, their position remained unstable and uncertain. Without official support from the Church, their status remained undefined and ambiguous. They were knights, but did not obey any king. They were monks, but were not part of traditional monastic orders, which aroused distrust and suspicion from both secular and church authorities. The solution to this issue came in 1129, when the Council of Troyes was held in the city of Troyes, becoming a turning point in the history of the Templar order. It was here, after long debates and discussions, that the Templars were officially recognized by the Catholic Church as a monastic military order, receiving all the rights and privileges due to religious organizations. The charter of the order, which regulated all aspects of the Templars' lives, was written by the influential theologian and public figure Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the main ideologues of the Crusader movement, who enjoyed great authority in Europe. He presented the Templars as ideal knights of God, people who do not strive for earthly glory and wealth, but wage a holy war in the name of faith, defending Christians from infidels and saving their souls. Recognition of the order by the Catholic Church meant that the Templars now obeyed not secular rulers, but directly the Pope, which ensured their independence and protection from the arbitrariness of local authorities. This gave the Templars enormous privileges and opportunities: independence from local laws, exemption from taxes, the right to create their own fortresses and commanderies, as well as collect donations throughout Europe, which allowed them to quickly increase their power and influence. From this moment on, the order began to grow and develop rapidly, transforming into one of the richest and most influential organizations in medieval Europe. Noble knights, who were masters of the art of war, joined it. European aristocrats transferred huge land holdings and money to the order, seeing this as a way to atone for their sins and secure a place in paradise. And the Pope himself supported them as his personal army in the Holy Land, ready to defend the interests of the Church at any moment. Their lives were governed by strict and clearly defined rules, blending monastic asceticism with military discipline, which set them apart as a distinct warrior class, unlike any other knightly orders of the time. Each Templar took 3 principal vows that would shape his life: chastity, poverty, and obedience, signifying a complete renunciation of personal life, possessions, and individual ambitions. Upon entering the order, a knight relinquished his titles, lands, and inheritance, forsaking all ties to worldly existence. If married, he had to leave his family forever, never to see his loved ones again. Should he own castles or estates, he would transfer them to the order's ownership, becoming a simple warrior with no claim to personal property. From that moment on, his only family became his brothers in the order, with whom he shared all the hardships and deprivations of military life, and his home was the fortresses and preceptories scattered throughout Europe and the Holy Land, where he spent most of his life serving the order and the Christian faith. The Templar order was meticulously organized and had a rigid hierarchy that distinguished it from the ordinary feudal armies of the time, where each knight acted at his own risk without submitting to a unified command. Whereas ordinary knights were subject to their lords, who could act independently of one another in pursuit of their own goals, the Templars were part of a tightly structured system governed by uniform laws and rules, which ensured high efficiency and coordinated action. At the head of the order stood the Grand Master, its supreme ruler and commander. He was elected for life from among the most experienced and respected knights and held absolute power within the order. The Grand Master not only commanded the troops, but also negotiated with kings, popes, and Byzantine emperors, representing the interests of the order on the international stage. He could declare wars, conclude peace treaties, and issue decrees concerning both military campaigns and the internal organization of the order, defining the strategy and tactics of its operations. The Marshal of the Order was its chief military commander and the Grand Master's right-hand man. He was responsible for training the knights, supplying the army with all necessary provisions, and developing battle tactics. He was the one who devised strategies for military campaigns, allocated forces, and commanded troops in battle if the Grand Master was not on the battlefield himself. The Draper managed the entire administrative system of the Order, responsible for financial matters, property management, and ensuring the smooth operation of all units of the Order scattered throughout Europe and the Holy Land. How, then, did they manage to accumulate such vast wealth? He maintained strict control over financial flows, ensuring the efficient allocation of resources among the various units of the Order, appointed the heads of individual preceptories, and oversaw the collection of taxes and donations that flowed into the Order's treasury from across Europe and the Holy Land. Commanders, in turn, managed the Order's fortresses, castles and landholdings located in different regions, serving as a vital link between the center and the periphery. In the Holy Land, they acted as military governors, responsible for defending the territories under their control and maintaining the constant combat readiness of the garrisons that protected the Christian population from Muslim attacks. In Europe, commanders were responsible for raising funds, recruiting new soldiers, and negotiating with the local nobility, ensuring a steady flow of resources and replenishment of the Order's ranks. The Knights of the Order constituted its elite, representing heavily armed horsemen who could rightly be called medieval special forces, distinguished by high discipline, excellent military training, and fearlessness in battle. They were among the most combat-ready and formidable warriors of their time, inspiring fear in enemies and admiration in allies. However, not only knights belonging to noble families served in the Order. A significant part of the Templar forces consisted of sergeants, who were warriors of lower birth who did not have the rank of knight. They served as heavy infantry, participating in the storming of fortresses and battles in open terrain, managing the Order's castles and estates, monitoring the economy, and performing various administrative functions. Many of them were knights' squires, helping them prepare for battle and care for weapons and armor. But at the same time, they could command small detachments, showing courage and initiative in battle. In addition, the Templar Order included chaplains, who were priests who provided spiritual support to the knights, performed liturgies, heard the brothers' confessions, and helped them realize their purpose in serving God. Finally, a special role in the structure of the Order was played by Turcopoles, who were light cavalry recruited from local residents who professed Christianity of the Eastern Rite. They were not full members of the Order, but served in combat units, performing reconnaissance and patrol functions, helping the Templars adapt to Muslim warfare tactics based on the use of fast and maneuverable cavalry. All of this complex and multi-layered structure worked as a single and well-coordinated mechanism, which made the Templar Order an incredibly effective and powerful organization capable of solving the most complex problems. A Templar's life was strictly regulated and subject to a rigorous code adopted in 1129 that governed all aspects of the brothers' existence, from spiritual life to everyday affairs. The code dictated how they should dress, eat, sleep, train, and even remain silent, allowing themselves no liberties or deviations from the established rules. A Templar's day began at dawn with morning prayer, during which the brothers asked God for help and protection in their upcoming endeavors. This was followed by a modest breakfast consisting of simple and unpretentious food, including bread, vegetables, beans, fish, or meat, but no more than 3 times a week in keeping with the monastic lifestyle. Templars were strictly forbidden from eating alone to avoid pride and arrogance. Meals were taken in complete silence, while religious texts were read, setting the brothers in a spiritual mood. After the meal, military training began, an integral part of every Templar's life. Knights trained daily in riding, archery, and swordsmanship, honing their skills and maintaining excellent physical condition. Particular attention was paid to fighting in formation, which was the basis of Templar tactics. Knights learned to attack in a unified front, cover each other in battle, and respond quickly to commanders' orders, making them virtually invincible in battle. But life in the Order was not limited to war and military training. Templars also cared for horses, which were their faithful companions in battle, repaired weapons and armor, keeping them in combat readiness, and studied maps and copied documents, engaging in intellectual activities. Many Templars spoke several languages, allowing the Order to actively negotiate with Byzantium, Arab states, and European monarchs, concluding profitable alliances and agreements. Of particular importance in a Templar's life was the vow of obedience, which was one of the cornerstones of Order discipline. Unlike secular knights, who could refuse to obey their lord's orders or leave the battlefield at will, Templars had no right to make unauthorized decisions and had to obey their commanders unquestioningly. They were obliged to fight to the end, even if the enemy outnumbered them, without showing fear or hesitation. Leaving the battle without an order was considered the most serious crime, tantamount to treason, for which inevitable expulsion from the Order and deprivation of all privileges followed. It was this iron discipline, strict code, and unquestioning obedience that made the Templars one of the most formidable and effective warriors of the Middle Ages, whose bravery and steadfastness became legendary. Where ordinary knights might falter or flee, saving their lives, the Templars fought to the last man, never retreating a step. Their organization, loyalty to brotherhood, and absolute devotion to their mission created an aura of invincibility around them, inspiring fear in enemies and admiration in allies. Every knightly order had its distinctive emblem, a symbol identifying its members and distinguishing them from other warriors. But it was the Templars' red cross on a white mantle that became one of the most recognizable and memorable symbols in history, associated with courage, self-sacrifice, and devotion. Initially, the brothers of the Order wore simple white clothing without any distinctive marks, which emphasized their humility, renunciation of personal ambitions, and striving for purity of spirit. The color white symbolized innocence and holiness, reminding everyone around them that the Templars were not ordinary knights craving glory and wealth, but monks dedicated to serving God and protecting the Christian faith. However, in 1147, Pope Eugene III, recognizing the merits of the Templars in defending the Holy Land, officially granted the Order the right to wear a red cross, symbolizing martyrdom, sacrifice, and willingness to die for the faith. This symbol made the Templars not just warriors, but God's chosen ones, who had received a special mission in this world. In battle, the Red Cross was meant to remind the Templars that their death would not be in vain, because they were fighting for a cause that was above earthly goals and of great importance to the entire Christian world. The shape of the cross could vary depending on the region and time period. Sometimes it was straight, sometimes with expanding ends, but it always remained scarlet, symbolizing the blood shed for Christ and the unbreakable oath of the Order never to retreat before the enemy, even in the face of imminent death. The Templars believed that death in battle was the greatest victory, because the fallen knight immediately entered the kingdom of God and attained eternal bliss. Unlike ordinary knights, who decorated their cloaks with coats of arms, gold, and furs, demonstrating their wealth and noble origins, the Templars' clothing remained strictly ascetic and devoid of any ornamentation. They were forbidden to wear personal insignia, so that no one would stand out among the brothers or rise above others. This emphasized their equality within the Order and unity in serving God. On the battlefield, everyone was one family, both noble aristocrats and ordinary peasants, united by a common goal and unbreakable bonds of brotherhood. But this symbol was not only a sign of devotion and faith. Over time, it became a sign of power, might, and influence. Seeing the red cross on a white cloak, European monarchs understood that they were facing members of a powerful organization with vast wealth, influential connections, and unshakable military strength, an organization that obeyed no king but acted only at the will of the Pope, which made it a formidable ally or a dangerous enemy. In the beginning, the Knights Templar truly lived up to their name, impoverished Knights of Christ, possessing no personal property or riches, content with only the bare necessities for survival. But what shifted over time? They thrived on generous donations that flowed in a continuous stream from every corner of Christian Europe, where the name of the Templars was shrouded in an aura of sanctity and heroism. Noble families, who considered it their duty to support the Holy Land and defend Christians from infidels, bequeathed to the order vast estates, impregnable castles, large sums of money, and profitable farmlands, hoping in this way to earn forgiveness for their sins and secure a place in paradise. However, as the order's influence grew in society, so did its material wealth, allowing it to expand its activities and acquire new lands and possessions. The Templars did not merely hoard gold and jewels lying dormant in their vaults. They knew how to manage them skillfully and efficiently, extracting maximum profit and increasing their wealth. Unlike secular feudal lords who squandered their riches thoughtlessly on lavish feasts, extravagant tournaments, and entertainment, the order used its resources strictly for their intended purpose, directing them to strengthen its military power, develop infrastructure, and expand its economic activities. Their fortresses were built according to a unified, carefully designed plan, ensuring maximum defense and functionality. Grain harvested from the fields was allocated in strictly calculated quantities to supply garrisons and those in need. And gold and silver were not stored idly in chests, but were put into circulation, generating a steady income for the order. Thus, the order gradually began to transform into a powerful financial structure, comparable to the first international bank, covering all of Europe and the Middle East with its activities. Their extensive network of preceptories was scattered throughout Europe, and each node of this network could serve as a repository of valuables, a transit point for transferring funds, and a clearing center for conducting financial transactions. One of the order's main innovations, which became a true revolution in the financial sphere, was the system of deposits and checks, which allowed large sums of money to be safely transported over long distances. European pilgrims, embarking on a dangerous and adventurous journey to the Holy Land, risked being robbed along the way by bandits or Muslim fanatics, losing all their funds. To avoid this unfortunate fate, they could leave their money for safekeeping in one of the order's branches, for example, in Paris or London, and receive in return a special document containing coded information about the amount of the deposit and the identity of the depositor. This document could be presented at another commandery located closer to the Holy Land, such as in Acre or Jerusalem, and receive there the equivalent amount in local currency without fear of being deceived or robbed. In essence, the Templars invented the first system of travelers' checks in history, making travel in the Mediterranean much safer and more comfortable for pilgrims and merchants. But most importantly, it gave the order enormous financial opportunities, allowing it to control significant cash flows and profit from them. By receiving funds for safekeeping, the Templars could dispose of them at their discretion, invest in the construction of new fortresses and castles, buy weapons and equipment for their warriors, finance trade expeditions, and carry out other profitable projects, increasing their wealth. Over time, even kings and noble families, needing money to wage wars and implement their ambitious plans, began to borrow large sums from the order, turning to the Templars as reliable lenders. The Templars willingly lent colossal sums to monarchs, but in return they demanded serious guarantees that ensured the return of the debt and brought additional benefits to the order. As collateral, they could demand land, valuable privileges, and sometimes even political concessions, allowing the order to expand its influence and control important areas of state life. Thus, the Templars gradually transformed into a true state structure within the Crusader world, possessing enormous economic and political power. They possessed not only the best combat training and the most disciplined army in the region, but also their own vast territories, well-fortified garrisons, a powerful fleet, and an effective management system that allowed them to control all aspects of life in their subject lands. Unlike kingdoms, which depended on vassal knights whose loyalty could be questioned, the Templars' power rested on strict discipline, unquestioning obedience, and a carefully organized defense that ensured stability and security in the region. However, the main instrument of their power and influence in the region became the impregnable fortresses scattered throughout the Middle East, which were veritable works of fortification art. These mighty outposts served not only to protect the conquered territories from Muslim attacks, but also to control important trade routes, ensure strategic superiority in the region, and demonstrate the strength and steadfastness of the Templars. The order built its castles in such a way that it was virtually impossible to take them either by storm or by a long siege, taking into account all the features of the terrain and using the most advanced technologies of the time. They were erected on the tops of impregnable cliffs, their walls plunged into deep precipices, and the internal architecture was designed in such a way as to turn each fortress into a multi-level defense system capable of withstanding a long siege. Among all the fortresses built by the Templars in the Middle East, the most famous and impressive was Crac des Chevaliers, a majestic crusader castle located in modern Syria near the city of Homs. This colossal outpost, towering more than 2,000 feet above sea level, offered a complete view of the surrounding area and allowed control of all approaches to the fortress. It stood on a strategically important road connecting Antioch and Tripoli and controlled the entire northern route of the Crusaders, ensuring safe passage for trade caravans and pilgrims. Crac des Chevaliers was a veritable city fortress, designed for the permanent residence of a garrison of 2,000 warriors, capable of withstanding a long siege without the need for reinforcement or external supply. Its outer walls, reaching 10 feet in thickness, were built at an angle, which caused enemy projectiles to slide down, reducing their destructive force and making it difficult to breach the wall. Behind the first line of defense were several more levels of protection, including towers, moats, passages, and traps, turning the fortress into an impregnable citadel that no enemy could take. Inside the castle was everything necessary for a siege lasting many years, allowing the garrison to withstand a long blockade without suffering from a lack of food, water, or weapons. Huge warehouses were filled with grain and other food, cisterns held a supply of drinking water, armories provided repair and manufacture of weapons and armor, stables housed numerous horses, and living quarters provided comfortable accommodation for knights and sergeants. Inside the castle was even a church where the knights offered prayers before battle, asking God for help and protection. Crac des Chevaliers was considered an impregnable and invincible castle that no enemy could take. Even when Muslim armies under the leadership of Saladin besieged it, they could not break through the defenses and were forced to retreat, suffering heavy losses. Only in 1271, after a long siege, was the castle surrendered, but not as a result of a storm, but as a result of betrayal. The defenders received a forged letter with an order from the Christian command to leave the fortress and surrender it to the Muslims. Believing the fake, they carried out the order and left the castle, which was immediately occupied by the Muslims. This was the only way to capture Crac des Chevaliers. They never managed to take it by force. The most important naval outpost of the Templar Order was the fortress of Atlit, located on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, south of modern-day Haifa, Israel. Its main task was to protect pilgrims and trade routes connecting the Holy Land with Europe from pirate attacks and Muslim ships. Here was one of the largest Templar garrisons, and the strong walls made the fortress impregnable from both land and sea. Atlit became one of the last Christian strongholds in the Middle East, continuing to resist the Muslims even after the fall of Acre and the loss of other Christian territories. Even after the fall of Acre, the fortress garrison continued to hold out, demonstrating steadfastness and loyalty to the order. Only when it became clear that help would not come from Europe and further resistance was futile did the last Templars leave the fortress, boarding ships and heading for Cyprus, where they hoped to find refuge and continue the fight against the infidels. Today, most of the fortress is destroyed, but its massive remains, rising above the sea, still testify to the former power and greatness of the Templar Order. Another important stronghold of the Order was the fortress of Tortosa, located in modern-day Lebanon, and played a key role in the defense of Christian territories. Unlike many other castles, Tortosa was never taken by storm, which testified to its high defensive capabilities. It was located on the coast and played a key role in the Templars' intelligence network, gathering information about the movements of Muslim troops and warning Christian settlements of impending danger. But what happened next? It was from here, from Tortosa, that the Crusaders constantly monitored the movements of Muslim armies, tracked trade routes connecting the Middle East with Europe, and controlled sea communications, ensuring the safety of Christian settlements and pilgrims. Tortosa was one of the last Christian strongholds in the region, continuing to resist the Muslims even as the Crusader states began to fall one after another, unable to withstand the enemy's onslaught. Even as the Crusader states began to fall one after another, this fortress continued to remain in the hands of the Order, symbolizing its steadfastness, unwavering commitment, and devotion to the Christian faith. With the growth in the number of fortresses, castles, landholdings, and financial assets, the Templars gradually began to transform from simply a knightly order into an independent and influential political force, one that all the rulers of the region had to reckon with. Their numerous military bases, located not only in the Holy Land but also in Europe, allowed them to maintain complete independence from kings and feudal lords, not submitting to their will or depending on their favor. No monarch could demand vassal service from them, which would obligate them to participate in wars and perform other duties. They were subordinate only to the Pope, who was their supreme sovereign, and therefore could conduct their own policies without asking permission from local rulers or considering their interests. This made them dangerous and unpredictable players on the international stage, capable of significantly influencing the course of political events. The Order's management system resembled a centralized state, possessing all the attributes of power and exercising control over all spheres of life in the territories under its control. Their vast possessions were divided into provinces, each of which was governed by a commander, appointed by the Grand Master of the Order and serving as his representative in that territory. Within these possessions, the Templars collected taxes, controlled trade routes, managed agriculture, maintained their own garrisons, and fortified fortresses, ensuring the safety of the population and protection from external threats. The Order had its own laws, its own courts that handed down sentences to criminals, and even diplomatic missions that represented the Order's interests at the courts of European monarchs and Eastern rulers. They negotiated on par with kings, formed alliances, and sometimes even intervened in conflicts between states, acting as an independent military force capable of changing the course of war. Let us examine the most famous and significant battles in which the Templar Order demonstrated its unparalleled military might, bravery, and resilience, earning the reputation as some of the finest warriors of the Middle Ages. One such battle was the Battle of Montgisard, which took place in 1177, in which just 500 knights and several thousand infantrymen, inspired by faith and courage, managed to defeat the enormous army of Saladin, which had been terrorizing the entire Middle East. By the autumn of 1177, the Holy Land was engulfed in a new wave of war, caused by the insatiable ambitions and aggressive policies of Sultan Saladin, who sought to unite all Muslim lands under his rule and expel the Christians from the Holy Land. From the south, a vast army of Sultan Saladin was moving towards the Holy Land, numbering, according to various estimates, between 26,000 and 30,000 warriors, representing a formidable force. These were not simply robber bands, hungry for plunder and profit, Nor were they isolated feudal militias, poorly trained and undisciplined, but an organized war machine consisting of elite Mamluks, light and heavy cavalry, archers, and foot soldiers, well armed and trained, ready for a long and bloody war. Saladin wanted to launch a surprise attack on Ascalon, a major coastal city through which the Kingdom of Jerusalem was supplied with food, weapons, and reinforcements from Europe. If Ascalon fell, the road to the Holy City would be open, and nothing would be able to stop the Muslim army marching towards Jerusalem. At that moment, there was no army in Jerusalem capable of containing Saladin's advance, as the main Crusader forces were scattered among various fortresses and garrisons located throughout the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Fortresses and castles held garrisons, but they were scattered throughout the country and could not resist such a numerous army. Many knights were far from Jerusalem, attending to their own affairs, and some of the king's vassals showed no desire to participate in the campaign against Saladin, fearing for their lands and wealth. The councils of nobles were inclined to lock themselves behind the walls of Jerusalem and try to withstand a long siege, hoping that Saladin, failing to take the city, would retreat and leave the borders of the Holy Land. But the young King Baldwin IV, despite his young age and serious illness, made another decision, displaying wisdom, courage, and determination worthy of admiration. He did not wait for the blow and did not hope that the enemy would retreat on its own, but decided to attack first, although this seemed like pure madness and suicide given the balance of forces. The young Baldwin, son of King Amalric, was only 16 years old at the time, but his fate had already been decided, and he was to play an important role in the history of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. From early childhood, he suffered from leprosy, a terrible and incurable disease in those days, which in the Middle Ages was considered God's curse and sentence. His hands and feet gradually lost sensitivity, his skin was covered with ulcers, and his face became disfigured, making him look like a living dead man. An ordinary person with such a diagnosis in those days would have ended up in a monastery or leprosarium, where he would have spent the rest of his days in prayer and repentance. But Baldwin was a king, and special hopes were placed on him. He could not escape his fate, and despite his serious illness, not only retained power, but also became a true warrior, displaying courage and wisdom in governing the state. He could sit confidently in the saddle, masterfully wield a sword, develop complex tactical plans, negotiate with foreign ambassadors, and, most importantly, make complex and responsible decisions that determined the future of his kingdom. And this time he made his choice, gathering everything he had and marching to meet Saladin to give him battle in the open field. Under his banner gathered only 500 knights, ready to fight to the last, and several thousand infantrymen, armed with spears and swords. Among them was a small but priceless detachment of experienced and battle-hardened warriors who were the pride of the Christian army. About 80 Templars, distinguished by high discipline, excellent military training, and fearlessness in battle, formed the elite of the Christian army and were ready to give their lives for the faith. No one believed in the possibility of defeating Saladin with such forces. It seemed like madness and suicide. No one except Baldwin himself, who believed in his lucky star and in the help of God, and his knights, ready to fight to the end, sparing no lives. Saladin did not expect resistance and was confident of his victory. His vast army moved in a relaxed march, stretched for many miles across the plain, not fearing an attack from the Crusaders. The Crusader troops seemed disjointed and posed no serious threat, meaning they could be destroyed piecemeal without much effort. The enemy warriors marched towards Ascalon without haste, setting up camps to rest, stretching out supply trains, and the vanguard did not rush to form up for battle, demonstrating their carelessness and confidence in victory. The Sultan was sure that there would be no major battle, and the Crusaders would prefer to sit behind the walls of the cities, not risking entering into open battle. But Baldwin knew that if he struck now, when the enemy was not formed and not ready for battle, he would have a chance of success, however small. He led his troops towards the hills, from where there was a view of the Muslim army stretched across the plain. At that moment, he brought forward the reliquaries with the true cross, a shrine that was considered a symbol of the protection of Christian lands and granted victory in battle. The warriors knelt, offering prayers to God and asking him for help and protection in the upcoming battle, knowing that they would most likely not return alive from this field. And after a short prayer, which filled their hearts with faith and courage, Baldwin gave the order to attack, without waiting for the enemy to come to its senses and prepare for battle. The first to enter the battle were the Templars, who formed the elite of the Christian army. They lined up in a wedge, representing a classic tactical formation of heavy cavalry, which was supposed to cut through the ranks of the enemy and sow panic in its ranks. They did not hesitate for a second and did not lose their formation, demonstrating their training and discipline. Their formation resembled the tip of a spear, ready to pierce the heart of the enemy and crush his resistance. They crashed into the first lines of Muslims like a bolt from the blue, breaking their ranks, tearing up their battle formation, and sowing panic and chaos in their ranks. Following the Templars, the king's cavalry struck, scattering the remnants of the advanced Muslim detachments and preventing them from regrouping and offering organized resistance. So, what happened next? Saladin, who did not expect such a bold and rapid onslaught from the Crusaders, tried to contain their advance and organize a defense, but his army did not have time to form up for battle and was caught off guard. The advanced units of the Muslims had already been defeated. The warriors in the center began to rush about in panic, and the baggage carriers and servants abandoned their carts and horses, trying to escape from the ranks of knights cutting them down, sowing chaos and confusion in the ranks of the Muslim army. The Mamluks, accustomed to maneuvering battles and flank attack tactics, were unable to regroup and adapt to the situation, finding themselves at a disadvantage. In this critical situation, the Crusaders, fighting in formation and advancing in a coordinated manner, demonstrated their training, discipline, and superiority in close combat, gaining a huge advantage over the bewildered and demoralized enemy. The battle continued all day, without ceasing for a minute. The Crusaders attacked in waves, exploiting the advantage of surprise and complete confusion in the ranks of the enemy, striking at the most vulnerable points in the Muslim defense. Their main task was to prevent the Muslims from regrouping and gathering into a single fist capable of offering organized resistance. They achieved this through desperate and continuous attacks, leaving the enemy no time for respite and preventing him from regaining strength. They gave no respite to themselves and gave none to the enemy, fighting with indomitable fury and determination. By evening, the battle was won. The Muslim army had suffered a crushing defeat. The remnants of Saladin's army turned into a panicked flight, fleeing from the Crusaders who were pursuing them. The Sultan himself miraculously escaped capture, leaving the battlefield with a small detachment of bodyguards, fearing falling into the hands of the victors. The Crusaders captured huge trophies, leaving behind a battlefield littered with the bodies of the dead and wounded, abandoned weapons, supplies, and siege engines. But their main trophy was the victory won over the numerically superior enemy, which strengthened their positions in the Holy Land. Montgizar became a triumph for Baldwin IV and his army, who demonstrated courage, resilience, and military skill. This was not just a battle, but a real feat, which for a time stopped the Muslim advance on the Holy Land and instilled hope in the hearts of Christians. It was proof that discipline, tactics, and faith can defeat even a huge army if the enemy has overestimated its strength and underestimated the capabilities of the opponent. This was a victory for the Templars, who once again showed that their resilience, courage, cold calculation in battle, and iron will can change the course of war and decide the fate of entire states. But the joy of victory was short-lived, overshadowed by a sense of impending doom. Baldwin knew that he had only won a battle, not the war, and that many more trials lay ahead. Saladin learned from his crushing defeat and vowed to avenge the humiliation and losses he had suffered at the hands of the Crusaders. He would never make such a mistake again, and he would carefully plan his next campaign, taking into account all the circumstances and calculating every step. He would return with a new army, even more powerful and better prepared than before, and then even the bravery of the Templars would not be able to save Jerusalem from falling. King Baldwin IV died without leaving behind any heirs capable of holding power and resisting Saladin's onslaught. After several years of turmoil and infighting, Guy de Lusignan, a weak, indecisive and hot-tempered man with little understanding of military strategy, took the throne, proving to be unequal to the task and failing to live up to expectations. Within the kingdom, tensions grew between the various factions of the nobility, each pursuing their own interests and unwilling to submit to the king. Some of the barons mistrusted the new king and plotted against him, undermining his authority and weakening the state. The Templars, though still the main military force of the Crusaders, could no longer single-handedly defend the Holy Land from external threats and needed support and allies. Saladin took advantage of the situation and began to systematically and purposefully weaken his enemies, gradually conquering their territories, raiding their lands, cutting off fortresses from supplies, and destroying trade routes, depriving the Crusaders of vital resources. The Crusaders could only watch as their kingdom slowly shrank under the onslaught of the Muslims, losing their lands, cities and castles, but they could do nothing to counter Saladin, lacking sufficient forces and resources to organize an effective defense. But they still hoped that they could withstand Saladin's onslaught if they gave him a decisive battle in the open field, where they could demonstrate their military might and crush the enemy. This was exactly what Saladin wanted. He was waiting for the Crusaders to come to him, leaving their fortress walls and falling into a trap he had prepared in advance, where they would face certain doom. In early July of the year 1187, his army invaded Galilee, besieging the city of Tiberias, located on the shore of the Sea of Galilee and serving as an important strategic point. This was a provocation designed to lure the Crusaders out of their fortresses and force them to accept battle on unfavorable terms. King Guy de Lusignan could not abandon the inhabitants of the besieged city and was forced to launch a campaign to rescue them, despite all warnings and fears. The Templars and experienced knights understood that this was a trap and that a campaign to rescue Tiberias was tantamount to suicide. They knew that in the July heat, under the scorching sun, without reliable sources of water and food, going on a campaign meant dooming the army to destruction and handing themselves over to the enemy. The Grand Master of the Templars, Gerard de Riedefort, initially opposed this insane plan, but then, under pressure from the king and other barons, changed his mind and agreed to participate in the campaign. He believed that the army could not sit idle in Jerusalem while the enemy ravaged their lands and exterminated the Christian population. Other barons also demanded an immediate battle with Saladin, wanting to erase the shame of defeats and restore the lost glory of the Crusader army. As a result of long debates and hesitations, a fateful decision was made: to move towards Saladin and engage in battle in the open field, ignoring the warnings and fears of experienced military leaders. The Crusader army numbered around 20,000 men, including all able-bodied knights, infantrymen, and warriors of the order, making it a formidable force capable of offering serious resistance to the enemy. They marched from Sepphoris, a small town with a source of fresh water, and headed towards Tiberias, hoping to break through to the besieged city and liberate it from the Muslims. Saladin had calculated the Crusaders' route in advance and positioned his army in such a way as to cut them off from water and force them to suffer from thirst and exhaustion. He knew that in this arid climate, thirst would kill the army faster than swords and make the Crusaders easy prey. The Crusaders moved slowly, experiencing great difficulties due to the heat and lack of water. Their troops stretched in a long column across the parched plain under the scorching sun that gave them no rest and burned out their last strength. Water supplies were running out quickly, and the nearest source was still several hours away, seeming endless. It was then that Saladin ordered his horsemen to attack the Crusaders, who were exhausted by thirst and fatigue. They did not engage in close combat, preferring to keep their distance and shoot at the Crusaders with bows and crossbows, preventing them from moving forward and exhausting them with their constant attacks. When night fell, the Crusaders found themselves trapped, surrounded on all sides by Muslim troops, and deprived of the opportunity to replenish their supplies of water and food. They were short of water, the men were exhausted, and the horses were collapsing from dehydration and exhaustion. Their only hope was to break through to the Sea of Galilee, where they could quench their thirst and regain their strength. But the road to the lake was blocked by superior enemy forces. The next morning, the Crusader army found itself encircled, surrounded on all sides by enemies and deprived of any hope of salvation. They took up a defensive position on 2 hills near the village of Hattin, hoping to repel the Muslim attacks and hold out until reinforcements arrived, but this could not help them, as they had no water, and the sun continued to scorch mercilessly, depriving them of their last strength. The morning of July the 4th, 1187, arrived, becoming a tragic day in the history of the Crusaders. Saladin ordered his warriors to set fire to the dry grass and bushes that grew around the hills, and hot smoke covered the Crusaders' positions, making it difficult to breathe and depriving them of the ability to resist. Dehydrated, weakened, and exhausted by the heat, the men could not offer worthy resistance to the enemy, and their defense quickly collapsed under the onslaught of the Muslims. When the Muslim army launched its attack, the forces were too uneven, and the Crusaders could not withstand the onslaught of the superior enemy forces. By noon, the battle was decided. The Crusaders had suffered a crushing defeat, and their army was almost completely destroyed. King Guy de Lusignan was captured by Saladin, and with him almost all the major barons and military leaders were seized, which was a heavy blow to the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The Grand Master of the Templars, Gerard de Ridefort, also found himself among the prisoners, sharing the sad fate of the king and other noble crusaders. But the main tragedy awaited the crusaders ahead, after the end of the battle, when Saladin ordered the execution of all captured Templars and Hospitallers, not wanting to leave such dangerous and implacable enemies alive. What was their fate? When the prisoners were brought into Saladin's tent, the Sultan, without hesitating for a second, ordered the execution of all the Templars and Hospitallers, not wanting to leave such dangerous and irreconcilable enemies alive. He understood that these warriors, hardened in battle and devoted to their ideals, could become a serious threat to his power and plans to unite the Muslim world. They were beheaded right in front of King Guy de Lusignan and other noble crusaders, whom Saladin decided to spare in order to use them for his political purposes. But Gerard de Ridefort, the Grand Master of the Templars, escaped this sad fate reserved for his brothers in arms. He did not face death as a knight should, but humbly awaited his fate, displaying cowardice and faint-heartedness. Soon he was granted freedom, but at the cost of betrayal. Saladin released him in exchange for the surrender of several important Crusader fortresses, which passed under Muslim control without a fight. This became an indelible stain on his name and forever tarnished the reputation of the Order of the Templars, which had always prided itself on the fact that its warriors preferred death to captivity and that no Templar surrendered to the enemy without a fight. But their master not only surrendered himself, but also used his high position and influence to save his life at the cost of losing important castles, without which the Crusaders could not effectively defend the Holy Land. Hattin was not just a defeat in a single battle, but a real catastrophe that predetermined the fate of the Crusaders in the Holy Land. Almost the entire Crusader army was destroyed in this battle, and Jerusalem itself was left defenseless against the onslaught of the Muslims. 3 months later, the Muslims entered Jerusalem, ending nearly a century of Christian rule in the Holy City. The Templars lost their main fortress, and their role in the Holy Land began to rapidly decline, bringing the era of the Crusades closer to its end. Everything they had built for almost a century collapsed in a single day, burying under its rubble hopes for the preservation of Christian presence in the Holy Land. From that moment on, the Order of the Templars, once formidable and powerful, turned into a group of survivors trying to regain their lost power and influence, but lacking sufficient forces and resources to do so. By the end of the 13th century, the Christian states in the East were living out their last days, approaching inevitable doom. After the crushing defeat at Hattin and the loss of Jerusalem, the Crusaders were never able to recover what they had lost, despite all their efforts and attempts. Their once mighty kingdom had shrunk to a narrow strip of coastline, and fortresses and cities fell one after another under the onslaught of the Muslims, leaving the Christians no hope of salvation. The monarchs of Europe were no longer in a hurry to send their armies to the Holy Land, tired of endless wars and disappointed in the Crusades. The Crusades had lost their former popularity, and the Pope's call for new expeditions was increasingly met with indifference and skepticism. In the East, on the other hand, the Muslim rulers were becoming stronger and more powerful, uniting the scattered lands under their rule and creating powerful states ready to fight the Crusaders. The last hope of the Christians to preserve their presence in the Middle East was Acre, which was the capital of the weakened but still existing Kingdom of Jerusalem. This large and prosperous city, located on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, was a key port and the main stronghold of the Crusaders, providing communication with Europe and serving as a transit point for trade and pilgrimage. It remained the most important trading center through which Eastern goods, which were in great demand, went to Europe, and in the opposite direction went knights, pilgrims, and supplies for the garrisons of the remaining fortresses, maintaining their combat effectiveness and ensuring their survival. The embassies of European states, merchant trading posts, residences of knightly orders, and the last combat-ready detachments of Crusaders, ready to fight to the end for the preservation of the Christian presence in the Holy Land, were located here. If Acre falls, then Christian power in the Holy Land will disappear forever, and the Crusaders will have to leave this region, leaving it in the hands of the Muslims. By 1290, it was clear this tragic moment was imminent, and Acre's fate was sealed. In the east, Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil of Egypt, a young and ambitious ruler, had risen, determined to complete the work begun by his predecessors and expel the Crusaders from the Holy Land. He assembled a vast and well-armed army, intending to destroy all Christian strongholds in the Middle East once and for all, and bring an end to the age of the Crusades. In the spring of 1291, Muslim forces laid siege to Acre, commencing the final and most bloody battle of the Crusaders for the Holy Land. The Knights Templar were among the city's main defenders, playing a key role in the defense and demonstrating courage, resilience, and devotion to their duty. Their order, weakened by the defeats of recent years, still maintained discipline, military prowess, and high morale, making them a formidable force capable of inflicting serious damage on the enemy. In Acre was their powerful citadel, one of the most fortified and impregnable structures in the city, capable of withstanding a long siege and serving as a secure refuge for the defenders. Along with the Templars, the city was home to the Hospitallers, Teutonic Knights, Genoese and Venetian mercenaries, and the remnants of the Kingdom of Jerusalem's army, ready to fight shoulder to shoulder with the Knights of the Orders. In total, the garrison of Acre numbered around 10,000 warriors, making the city strong enough to withstand a lengthy siege. The Muslims approached the walls of Acre in early April, surrounding the city on all sides and beginning to methodically destroy its fortifications. Their army was significantly larger, estimated at around 200,000 men, including cavalry, infantry, and sapper units specializing in the destruction of fortress walls. They had siege towers, trebuchets, battering rams, and demolition teams that spent weeks digging tunnels under the fortifications, planting explosives, and collapsing walls. The Crusaders resisted desperately, but the Muslims methodically destroyed the city walls, giving the defenders no respite and bringing the moment of the assault closer. Assaults on the city followed one after another, interspersed with short respites during which both sides licked their wounds and prepared for new battles. Crusader archers fired day and night from the towers, trying to destroy the siege engines and prevent the Muslims from approaching the walls. Knights made desperate sorties, attempting to destroy the siege engines, set fire to the enemy camp, and capture prisoners. But the Muslim army was too numerous, and all their efforts proved futile. One after another, the towers of Acre collapsed under the blows of the siege weapons, and by mid-May it became clear that the city was doomed, and its fall was only a matter of time. On May 19th, Muslim troops stormed into Acre, breaching the defenses and breaking the defenders' resistance. A horrific massacre began, sparing no one. The streets of the city were filled with fleeing citizens in panic, burning buildings, and endless skirmishes between Crusaders and Muslims, fiercely fighting for every house and every street. The Templars and Hospitallers defended their positions to the last, retreating step by step and offering fierce resistance to the enemy. But their forces were rapidly dwindling, and the hope of salvation became increasingly illusory. When it became clear that Acre could not be saved and the city had fallen, the defenders retreated to the last fortified quarters, trying to organize a defense and buy time for the evacuation of the remaining inhabitants. The Templars locked themselves in their citadel, a massive fortress on the seashore and the last stronghold of Christians in the Holy Land. The Sultan offered them surrender, guaranteeing them life and freedom, but the Grand Master of the Order proudly refused, declaring that the Templars never surrender to the enemy. Then the Muslims began to storm the citadel, intending to take it at any cost and destroy the last defenders of Acre. The fighting lasted for several days, but the walls of the citadel remained impregnable, repelling all Muslim attacks and inflicting huge losses on them. On May 28th, the Egyptians offered a truce, promising the Templars unhindered departure from the city and guaranteeing their safety. According to the agreement, the surviving Templars were allowed to leave the city on ships and go to Cyprus, where they could find refuge and continue the fight against the infidels. However, when the knights emerged from the fortress to discuss the terms of surrender, Muslim warriors treacherously attacked them, breaking the truce and showing treachery and cruelty. Those who did not manage to retreat back into the fortress were slaughtered, falling victim to betrayal and perfidy. The next day, the surviving Templars locked themselves in their citadel and continued their defense, unwilling to surrender to the enemy and ready to fight to the last man. But this was the end. They had no strength left, no food, and no hope of help from outside. On May 28th, the last defenders of Acre were killed, and the citadel itself was blown up, burying under its ruins the remnants of the Order's archive and treasury. Thus ended the Christian history of the Holy Land, which had lasted for almost 200 years. With the fall of Acre, the Crusaders finally lost their possessions in the east, and the Holy Land came under Muslim control. The Templars who survived the massacre and escaped death fled to Cyprus, where they hoped to find refuge and continue their activities, but their former power was undermined, and their future remained uncertain and undefined. What awaited them ahead? Their order formally still existed, but the loss of the Holy Land meant that their original mission, which was to protect Christian shrines and pilgrims, no longer made sense and lost its relevance. Acre became the last great battle of the Crusaders in the East, symbolizing the end of 200 years of Christian rule in the Holy Land and the end of an entire heroic but tragic era of Crusades. Their impregnable fortresses in the Holy Land fell under the onslaught of the Muslims, but in Europe they remained a powerful force, possessing vast landholdings, immense wealth, and significant political weight, which allowed them to play an important role in European politics. However, along with the loss of their military mission and the loss of the Holy Land, many myths, mysteries, and conspiracy theories began to grow around the Order, fueling interest in the Templars and making them one of the most mysterious organizations in history. One of the most enigmatic and mystical symbols later associated with the Templars is the Holy Grail, a chalice with supernatural properties capable of granting immortality and healing. The legend surrounding it is one of the most mysterious, enigmatic, and controversial stories of the Middle Ages, still stirring the minds of historians and mystery enthusiasts. But what is the Grail? Was it really connected to the Templars? Or is it just a myth created by centuries of popular rumor and literary imagination? The origins of the legend of the Grail go far beyond the history of the Templars, into the depths of centuries, and originate not in the documents of the Order or historical chronicles, but in Arthurian legends, telling of King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, and their search for the Holy Grail, recorded in the 12th century. One of the first authors to write about the Grail, the French poet Chrétien de Troyes, in his unfinished romance Percival, or the Story of the Grail, describes a mysterious chalice possessing sacred power and symbolizing grace and redemption. But in this early version, the Grail was not yet identified with the cup of the Last Supper and was presented more as a magical vessel carrying grace and granting special abilities to the chosen ones. Later, in the texts of Robert de Boron and Wolfram von Eschenbach, the legend of the Grail underwent significant changes and additions. The Grail became the holy chalice from which Jesus Christ drank during the Last Supper, and then his blood was collected in it during the crucifixion, making it one of the most revered Christian relics. The legend included a connection with early Christianity and secret brotherhoods, passing down sacred relics and knowledge from generation to generation, hidden from the uninitiated. But how did this story of the Grail become connected with the Templars, and why are they credited with the role of guardians of this sacred relic? Some researchers believe that the Templars, thanks to their power, wealth, and influence, could have been the keepers of the Grail, which came into their possession as a result of their activities in the Holy Land. Already in the late Middle Ages, rumors began to circulate that the Order of the Templars possessed special relics and secret knowledge brought from Jerusalem, which could be of immense value to the Christian world. The connection between the Templars and the Grail was also traced on a symbolic level, since they were not just warriors fighting for the faith, but also secret guardians of Christian knowledge, protecting sacred relics from desecration and oblivion. Another layer of the legend of the Grail arose thanks to the Cathars, a Christian religious movement widespread in southern France in the 12th and 13th centuries, and persecuted by the Catholic Church for their heretical views. The Cathars were destroyed during the Albigensian Crusade, unleashed by the Catholic Church against the Cathars. But before that, they were known for their esoteric teachings and the idea of secret knowledge hidden from the uninitiated. Some later theories claimed that the Cathars possessed the Grail or some other important relic associated with Jesus Christ, and that before their very destruction, they passed it on to the Templars, fearing that it would fall into the hands of enemies. Thus, the Grail, from a literary symbol, gradually turned into a mystical secret, closely connected with the disappearance of the treasures of the Order of the Templars, giving rise to many legends and speculations. To this day, there is no convincing evidence that the Templars actually possessed anything like the Grail or any other relic with supernatural properties. However, this exciting legend itself, born from a mixture of Arthurian myths, Gnostic teachings, and rumors about the immense treasures of the Order, continues to stir people's minds and inspire writers, artists, and filmmakers to create new works of art. But if the Grail remained more of a myth woven into knightly romances and folk tales, the Templars' connection to Solomon's Temple was quite real and supported by historical facts. When the Templar Order first appeared, its knights, arriving in the Holy Land, settled in the old temple complex located on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where the legendary temple of King Solomon once stood. They called themselves the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon, and this name was not chosen by chance, but had a deep symbolic meaning. For several years, while they were still very few in number and did not possess sufficient power and influence, the Templars did not participate in major battles or build castles, but were engaged in guarding pilgrims and studying the ruins of Solomon's Temple, trying to find something important and valuable within them. Later, when the order suddenly gained immense power and wealth, rumors spread that the Templars had found something in the ruins of Solomon's Temple that radically changed their destiny and predetermined their further rise. One of the most popular and widespread theories states that the sacred relics of ancient Israel, which disappeared after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in the 6th century before Common Era, could have been stored in the depths of the Temple Mount. Some believed that the Templars found the Ark of the Covenant, the greatest relic of the Old Testament, which contained the tablets with the 10 Commandments received by Moses on Mount Sinai. According to legend, the Ark was hidden before the destruction of the First Temple, and its location has since remained a mystery, haunting treasure hunters and historians alike. Another version connects the Templars with secret texts and ancient knowledge that could reveal information different from official Christian doctrine and questioning the dogmas of the Catholic Church. In the Middle Ages, there were rumors that temple priests possessed occult knowledge and magical secrets that were passed down from generation to generation only to the elect, those initiated into the secrets of the temple. If the Templars did indeed find ancient scrolls containing some secret about the origin of Christianity or about the life of Jesus Christ, this could explain their subsequent conflict with the papacy, which sought to maintain its power and influence in the Christian world. Supporters of more radical theories believed that the Templar order discovered something so dangerous in the ruins of Solomon's Temple that the Catholic Church decided to destroy it in order to hide the truth from the world. Perhaps it was information that called into question the dogmas of faith, or advanced technologies that surpassed the level of knowledge in medieval Europe, which could undermine the power of the Church and change the world. However, there is a simpler and more prosaic explanation for the Templars' sudden enrichment. The Templars could have found gold, jewels, and other valuable relics in the ruins of Solomon's Temple, which they later used to strengthen their power and expand their economic activities, turning into one of the richest and most influential organizations in medieval Europe. The order became incredibly wealthy in a short period, and its financial power grew with each decade, allowing it to buy up land, build castles, and interfere in politics. Perhaps the secret treasures of the Templars, which were so often spoken about, were not mystical artifacts with supernatural properties, but quite real reserves of gold and precious stones found in the Jerusalem ruins, which allowed the order to achieve unprecedented power. Be that as it may, no convincing evidence of the existence of these finds has yet been found, and this question remains a subject of debate and discussion between historians and researchers. But we know that the Templars did indeed settle in Solomon's Temple and conducted excavations there, trying to find something important and valuable in its ruins that could help them in fulfilling their mission and strengthening their influence in the Holy Land. But what happened next? We know that soon after they became powerful and wealthy, but everything else is just conjecture, assumptions, and legends that have surrounded the order for centuries and have no solid historical basis. Already in the Middle Ages, the opinion emerged that the power of the Templars was not connected with money and power, but with ancient knowledge and secret teachings, which they could have received in the Holy Land, studying the ruins of Solomon's Temple and communicating with sages and scholars. Their close connection with Solomon's Temple led many to suspect that the order had found something much more valuable in Jerusalem than gold and relics, something that allowed them to gain incredible influence and power. These ideas were supplemented by rumors that the Templars had contacts with Muslim and Jewish sages, could access ancient manuscripts containing knowledge hidden from the uninitiated, and may have even been familiar with traditions that were rooted in the times of ancient Egypt and Babylon, the cradle of human civilization. Centuries later, all these assumptions and speculations merged with another, no less fascinating idea. The Templars, may have been one of the first esoteric orders in Europe, preserving secret knowledge and practices passed down from generation to generation. Already in the 17th century, when Masonic lodges spread throughout Europe, the idea emerged that it was through them that the lost knowledge of the Templars was transmitted, preserved in secret rituals and teachings. The Masons revered Solomon's Temple as a sacred symbol. Their rituals were associated with ancient building traditions, and the very process of initiation into the lodges resembled the strict discipline of knightly orders, which gave rise to many theories about the connection between the Masons and the Templars. Some Masonic structures directly stated that they traced their tradition back to the Templars, and in the 18th century, Templar degrees began to appear in the charters of lodges, which allegedly dated back to the 13th century and testified to the continuity of traditions and knowledge. But the legends about the Templars were not limited to their connection with Freemasonry alone, but continued to develop and acquire new details. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the idea emerged that the Templars were connected with alchemy, the mysterious and enigmatic art of transforming matter. In the Middle Ages, alchemy was considered not just a science of metals, but a system of secret knowledge that included ideas about the transformation of matter, the attainment of immortality, and the search for the philosopher's stone, capable of turning any metal into gold. There were rumors that the Templars possessed knowledge that allowed them to create gold, use unknown technologies, or even change the structure of consciousness, making them practically omnipotent. Some sources claimed that they could have obtained this knowledge from Arab scholars, who at that time were ahead of Europe in the development of natural sciences and possessed unique knowledge in the field of alchemy, astrology, and magic. Later, these theories were supplemented by ideas that the order may have possessed certain lost texts and ancient manuscripts containing information that did not coincide with canonical Christian beliefs and called into question the dogmas of the Catholic Church. In the era of Romanticism in the 19th century, many books and novels appeared in which the Templars were portrayed as secret magicians, initiated into the innermost laws of the universe and possessing incredible abilities that made them practically invulnerable. From a scientific point of view, all these theories and assumptions have no convincing evidence and are based only on rumors, legends, and folk tales that have been passed down from generation to generation. There is not a single reliable document that would connect the Templars with alchemy or Masons, and there is no archaeological evidence that any manuscripts or relics were found in Solomon's Temple that would confirm these theories. The Templars were indeed rich and powerful, but their secret lay not in occult knowledge and mystical practices, but in the ability to manage resources, conduct military campaigns, and build state structures, ensuring their political and economic superiority. All the later theories and legends about the Templars appeared several centuries after their destruction and became part of a mythology that transformed the order from a military brotherhood into a symbol of world mystery, attracting people's attention and inspiring them to create new works of art. By the beginning of the 14th century, the Templar Order remained one of the most influential and powerful organizations in Europe, controlling vast territories and possessing immense wealth. They lost the Holy Land, but did not lose their influence and power in European countries, where their commanderies were located throughout Western Europe, stretching from England to Italy and from Spain to Germany. They owned vast land holdings, impregnable castles, thriving ports, and even entire trade routes, controlled banking operations, and issued large loans to kings and noble feudal lords, generating huge profits and increasing their wealth. The Templars did not obey any monarch and were not dependent on their will. Their sole patron and protector was the Pope, which made them independent even of the most powerful rulers of Europe, and allowed them to pursue their own policies without regard to the interests of local authorities. But such independence and power aroused discontent and envy from many rulers, who saw the Templars as a threat to their power. In France, where the order had a particularly strong influence and enjoyed great prestige, the Templars had a dangerous enemy who eventually managed to destroy them, King Philip IV, who went down in history under the nickname the Fair. Philip ascended the throne in 1285 and almost immediately faced serious problems that threatened his power and the stability of the kingdom. His reign was accompanied by constant wars with neighboring states, which required huge expenses and depleted the royal treasury. He waged war with England, trying to seize Flanders, fought for control of Navarre, and also engaged in a conflict with the papacy, refusing to submit to its will and defending the independence of the French crown. All this required huge financial investments, and the royal treasury was empty, preventing the king from satisfying his ambitions and carrying out the necessary reforms. Ordinary methods of collecting money, such as taxes and duties, no longer worked, as they caused discontent and unrest among nobles and merchants who did not want to pay more than required. Philip even resorted to radical measures, such as expelling Jews from France and confiscating their property, but even this was not enough to replenish the treasury and solve financial problems. Loans from the Templars became his only way out of the situation, allowing him to obtain the necessary funds to wage wars and maintain stability in the kingdom. The Templar order had been engaged in financial operations for many years, providing loans to monarchs, nobility, and large merchants at favorable interest rates. They stored the money of European rulers in their castles, controlled the transfer of funds between states, and also ensured the security of large trade deals, earning huge sums of money from this and strengthening their financial power. Philip IV borrowed huge sums of money from the Templars, but over time it became clear that he would not be able to return them, as his financial situation worsened with each year. At this point, he came up with a cunning and dangerous idea. If he cannot repay the debt, it is better to destroy the creditor, appropriating his wealth and getting rid of financial dependence. But money was not the only reason for his hatred of the Templars. In Europe, Philip sought to establish absolute royal power, not limited by anything, and the Templars stood in his way, representing a serious threat to his ambitions. The order was too powerful, too rich, and too independent, which did not suit the king, who sought to subdue all forces in the kingdom. So, how did he decide to act? Their fortresses, scattered throughout France, effectively constituted a state within a state, beholden to no one but themselves and governed by their own laws. Their financial dealings transcended the monarchy, reaching across Europe and into the Middle East. Crucially, they answered only to the Pope, rendering them independent of the French king and allowing them to pursue their own agenda, regardless of the interests of the French crown. This was utterly unacceptable to Philip, who craved absolute power and would brook no independence within his realm. He was already engaged in a fierce struggle to control the church, seeking to bring the papacy under his sway and make it a tool of his policies. In 1303, he succeeded in securing the election of a new pope, Clement V, who owed his position to Philip and was firmly under his thumb. The king anticipated that he could now subjugate the Templars as well, forcing them to serve the interests of the French crown. However, the order refused to become a mere appendage of the French state, clinging to its independence from the king. Thus, by the beginning of 1307, Philip had arrived at what seemed to him the only viable and sensible solution. The order of the Templars must vanish from the face of the earth, lest it continue to pose a threat to his power and obstruct his ambitions. In so doing, he would kill two birds with one stone. He would rid himself of the enormous debts he could not repay and eliminate a dangerous political rival possessing immense influence and authority. But destroying such a powerful and influential organization was no easy feat, as the Templars enjoyed the support of many European monarchs and the protection of the Pope. Had the king simply declared war on the Templars, they could have retreated to their numerous fortresses and mounted a fierce resistance, leading to a long and bloody war with an uncertain outcome. He needed to find a pretext that would render their destruction legitimate in the eyes of public opinion and allow him to avoid accusations of tyranny and injustice. He soon found such a pretext, and the 13th of October, 1307, would soon arrive, a day that would become a tragic date in the history of the Order of the Templars, marking the end of their existence. By the fall of 1307, the Order of the Templars remained blissfully unaware that their days of power were numbered and that the treacherous French king had already prepared a deadly trap for them. Grandmaster Jacques de Molay was in Paris at the invitation of King Philip, confident that the order maintained its high standing in society and enjoyed the patronage of crowned heads. The Templars still possessed vast lands, impregnable fortresses, and immense financial resources, and Pope Clement V, despite constant pressure from the French court, was in no hurry to condemn the order or withdraw his support. But Philip IV had already made his final decision, and his plans were meticulously drawn up and ready for implementation. He knew that it was impossible to simply strip the Order of the Templars of its power and wealth by issuing a decree or confiscating their property. If he declared war on them, they could retreat to their impregnable fortresses and launch a rebellion that would engulf all of France and threaten his rule. Therefore, the king chose a different tactic, one more cunning and effective, a lightning strike that would catch the Templars off guard and deny them the opportunity to organize any resistance. Philip prepared the operation to arrest the Templars in advance, carefully planning each step and anticipating all possible complications. Secret orders were sent to royal governors and trusted confidants several weeks before the appointed date, but they were not to be opened until the last minute to prevent any leaks of information and to deny the Templars the opportunity to take precautions. On the night of the 13th of October, 1307, thousands of royal soldiers, armed to the teeth and ready to carry out any order, moved throughout France, receiving strict orders to arrest all members of the Order of the Templars simultaneously, to avoid resistance and prevent them from hiding their treasures. The Templars were caught completely off guard and were utterly unprepared for such a turn of events. They were confident in their safety and believed that they were under the reliable protection of the papacy, and therefore did not even think to strengthen their positions or prepare for defense. In one night, the Order of the Templars lost its leaders, treasury, management system, and all communication between individual garrisons, finding itself in complete chaos and disarray. In Paris, Grandmaster Jacques de Molay himself was captured, along with other leaders of the order who fell victim to the French king's cunning plan. They were arrested without a fight under the pretext that it was a personal order from the Pope, which made it possible to avoid resistance and prevent bloodshed. Royal troops seized the main treasury of the Templars, but the order's main treasures, as it turned out, had disappeared without a trace, never falling into the king's hands. By the morning of the 14th of October, all of France knew that the once invincible and powerful Templars had fallen in one night, becoming victims of a cunning conspiracy and losing all their property and power. But the arrest of the Templars was only the beginning of the French king's treacherous plan. Now Philip needed to prove that the order truly deserved destruction and that its members were guilty of crimes punishable by severe penalties. Philip could not simply say that he destroyed the Templars for their money and power, as this would cause outrage in Europe and undermine his authority. To justify the mass arrests, confiscation of property, and brutal reprisals against the Templars, he needed something that would make the order enemies of the Christian world and allow him to portray himself as a defender of the faith. In those days, the most terrible crimes punishable by death were heresy, witchcraft, and betrayal of the Christian faith. It was these absurd and false accusations that were leveled against the Templars, becoming the basis for their destruction. First of all, royal investigators, acting on Philip's orders and not shy about choosing their methods, declared that the Order of the Templars practiced secret rites that contradicted the Catholic Church and were a manifestation of heresy. Under cruel torture, unable to withstand the pain and fear, the arrested Templars began to give confessions, claiming that at secret meetings they spat on the cross, renounced Christ, and worshipped a demonic idol known as Baphomet, which was a clear manifestation of blasphemy and apostasy. One of the most mysterious and absurd accusations against the Templars was their alleged worship of Baphomet, a mysterious demonic being whose image is not found in any Christian source. Investigators claimed that the order kept a strange head to which it made secret sacrifices and which it revered as its god. Some confessions of the Templars, extracted under torture, said that it was a human skull, others that it was a statue with a bearded face, still others that it was an image of a demon with a goat's head, which clearly indicated their connection with the devil. But what did this mysterious name Baphomet mean, and where did it come from? Before the trial of the Templars, it had never appeared in either Christian or Muslim documents, which made its origin a mystery. Some historians believe that the word Baphomet may have been a distorted pronunciation of the name Muhammad, the founder of Islam, which indicated the Templars' contacts with Muslims and their possible apostasy. Others believe that it may have been an occult symbol invented by alchemists or Gnostics in later ages and had nothing to do with the Templars. In any case, there is no real and reliable evidence that the Templars actually worshipped Baphomet or any other demonic being. Another key accusation leveled against the Templars was the claim that when initiated into the order, new recruits spat on the cross and renounced Christ, thereby committing the grave sin of blasphemy and betraying the Christian faith. According to testimonies extracted from the Templars under torture, this was a ritual that was supposed to prove their loyalty to the order, even if they had to renounce their faith and betray their beliefs. In fact, there are no historical mentions of this ritual before 1307, when the trial against the Templars began. Most likely, this accusation arose because investigators needed to prove at all costs that the order had secretly turned away from the church and began to serve the devil. Finally, another shocking and disgusting accusation leveled against the Templars was the stories of sinful rites involving homosexual relations between knights, which was considered a terrible sin in medieval society. During interrogations, the Templars were forced to confess that during initiation into the order they had to kiss each other on the lips, navel, and buttocks, which supposedly meant their complete submission to the order and rejection of moral principles. However, historians are sure that this accusation was completely fabricated and had no basis, since it was based only on rumors and prejudices widespread in medieval society. So what happened next? In the Middle Ages, homosexual relations were considered a mortal sin, and such statements allowed the order to be blackened in the eyes of ordinary people, causing them disgust and contempt for the Templars. But the Order of the Templars did not give up without a fight, and was not going to plead guilty to crimes that it did not commit. Many knights, despite the cruel torture, refused to confess to heresy and other atrocities, stating that all the accusations were false and fabricated by the treacherous French king. This was extremely disadvantageous to the king, since he could not allow the Templars to come before the people and the church to refute the accusations and expose his cunning plans. That is why a new wave of torture began, even more cruel and sophisticated, the purpose of which was to break the will of the knights and force them to utter the words that the king needed, confirming their guilt. The French Inquisition, acting on Philip's orders and completely subordinate to him, already had extensive experience in conducting interrogations using cruel and inhumane methods, stopping at nothing to achieve its goal. The Templars became victims of the most terrible medieval tortures, which only a few, distinguished by incredible fortitude and willpower, could endure. In the damp and gloomy dungeons, where darkness and despair reigned, they were hung by their hands, their joints were broken, their skin was burned with red-hot iron, they were stretched on the rack and subjected to other torments that left no living space on their bodies. Some Templars spent weeks without water and food, in complete darkness, experiencing unbearable suffering that drove them to madness. Punishments were designed not to kill the victim, but to break their spirit, deprive them of the will to resist, and force them to admit their guilt in crimes they did not commit. Under the influence of such cruelty and inhumane treatment, the long-awaited confessions began to appear. Knights, brought to the brink of death and no longer able to endure the pain, agreed to confirm any accusations made against them, just so that the torture would stop and the long-awaited relief would come. They signed documents in which they confessed to renouncing Christ, worshipping Baphomet, participating in secret rites, and committing other grave sins, putting an end to their reputation and admitting their guilt before the Church and the king. But as soon as some Templars, thanks to a lucky set of circumstances, temporarily left the prisons and were given the opportunity to speak freely, they immediately retracted their confessions, stating that they had been forced to lie under torture in order to avoid further torment and save their lives. This put the Inquisition in an extremely difficult position, since now it was necessary to subject the Templars to repeated torture or immediately sentence them to death, without giving them the opportunity to justify themselves. It was important for Philip IV not only to obtain confessions from the Knights Templar, but also to erase the Templar order from people's memories, forever tarnishing their name and depriving them of any possibility of justification and rehabilitation. Therefore, in 1312, Pope Clement V, who had previously tried to remain neutral and not interfere in the conflict between the French king and the Templars, was forced to submit to the pressure of King Philip and officially dissolve the Templar order, issuing a corresponding bull. This marked the end of the Templars as an organization, ending their many years of history and depriving them of all rights and privileges. But it was not enough for the king to simply dissolve the order. He needed to finally deal with its leaders so that no one could challenge his decision and try to revive the order in the future. He faced one last and most cruel test, which became the culmination of the tragic history of the Templars. When the Templar order was just gaining strength and winning glory on the battlefields, it was led by great generals who possessed military talent and were able to lead their troops to victory. When the order was experiencing its period of prosperity and power, its masters were experienced diplomats and politicians who knew how to negotiate with kings and popes and conclude profitable alliances. But the last master of the Templar order, Jacques de Molay, went down in history for a completely different reason. He became a victim of a treacherous conspiracy, a symbol of resilience and courage, and, as it turned out, a curse for his enemies, dooming them to a quick and painful death. Jacques de Molay, who headed the Templar order at the end of the 13th century, was not an adventurer or reformer seeking to change the world. He was a simple and sincere man who believed in the ideals of the Templars and considered them a brotherhood of warriors, loyal to the Church and ready to give their lives for the faith. When the arrests of the Templars began, he could not believe that the Pope and the bishops would turn away from the order and leave it without protection. Even when he was thrown into a dark dungeon and subjected to cruel torture, he did not lose hope and continued to believe that the Church would intervene and save him from unjust persecution. But the Church remained silent, unwilling to enter into conflict with the powerful French king. For 7 long years, he was held in captivity, subjected to interrogations and torture, and forced to sign confessions that refuted all the ideals he had served. And finally, in 1314, he was brought to the square in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral to have the verdict pronounced by the inquisitorial tribunal read to him. According to King Philip's prearranged plan, Jacques de Molay was to admit his guilt in the crimes he had supposedly committed and publicly repent of his delusions, thereby confirming the validity of the accusations made against the Templars. But instead, to the surprise of those gathered, Jacques de Molay renounced all his previous confessions, loudly declaring that the Templars were innocent of anything and that they had been unjustly destroyed, becoming victims of a treacherous conspiracy. This was a bold challenge thrown to the king himself, who could not leave it unanswered. The very next day, March the 18th, 1314, Jacques de Molay and his associates were burned at the stake on the Ile de la Cité, located in the middle of the Seine, in front of a large crowd gathered to watch the execution of heretics. According to legend, when the flames engulfed Jacques de Molay's body, he uttered a terrible curse addressed to his main enemies, foretelling their quick and agonizing death. "Pope Clement, King Philip, before a year passes, you will appear before God's judgment." These words may have been invented later, but the amazing and inexplicable fact remains. Both of Jacques de Molay's main enemies actually died within a year of his execution, as predicted in his curse. Pope Clement V died on April the 20th, 1314, just a month after de Molay's execution, without having time to enjoy the fruits of his power. Contemporaries said that he suffered from a terrible disease that tormented his body, and before his death he was seized with inexplicable fear and a premonition of imminent death. Philip IV died in November of the same year after a mysterious illness that struck him suddenly and proceeded with high fever and severe pain. Some claimed that he slowly faded away in agony, experiencing unbearable pain and remorse for what he had done. These amazing coincidences gave rise to the legend of the Templar curse, which haunted their enemies and doomed them to a quick and agonizing death. In the following years, the dynasty of Philip IV quickly died out, leaving no heirs capable of retaining power in their hands, and France was drawn into the 100 Years' War with England, which led the country to chaos, devastation, and civil strife. From a scientific point of view, there is no reliable evidence that Jacques de Molay actually uttered this curse before his death. The first mentions of it appeared decades after his execution and are most likely just fiction designed to avenge the death of the Grand Master. However, the fact remains, his enemies did die shortly after his death, which gave rise to many legends and speculations about the Templar curse. Thus ended the history of the Order of the Templars, a once powerful and influential organization that possessed immense wealth and enjoyed the support of kings and popes. Their organization was defeated and its legacy erased, their lands transferred to other organizations, their commanders executed, and their symbols and traditions consigned to oblivion. But their history did not disappear without a trace. On the contrary, with each century it became more and more mysterious and enigmatic, acquiring new details and speculations, turning the destroyed order from a military brotherhood into a symbol of secret knowledge, conspiracies, and mystical forces. After the destruction of the Templar Order, it seemed that its influence would disappear forever, and the memory of it would be forgotten. The Templars were declared heretics, their lands transferred to other organizations, their commanders executed, and their symbols and traditions cursed and forgotten. But history decreed otherwise, and fate had its own way. The more time passed since their defeat, the deeper the mark they left on history and culture became, and the more legends and mysteries surrounded their names. They did not simply pass into the past, they became part of the most enduring and captivating legends of the Middle Ages, continuing to stir the minds of people and inspire them to create new works of art. The main question that concerns historians and enthusiasts to this day is, did the Templars really disappear without a trace? Or were they able to save part of their treasures and secrets which they passed on to their followers, who remained faithful to the ideals of the order? Some researchers, rejecting the official version of events, believe that the Templar Order was not completely destroyed and that its legacy continued to live on in the most unexpected forms, influencing the course of history and culture. One of the most persistent and widespread versions claims that some of the knights, learning about the impending conspiracy and avoiding arrest, fled from France to remote areas that would later become Switzerland, hoping to find refuge there and continue their activities. Just a few decades after the defeat of the Templar Order, military communities appeared in this mountainous region, distinguished by strict discipline, high combat capability, and an unusual management structure that resembled the organization of the Templars. These groups, known as Swiss mercenaries, became famous for their courage, resilience, and loyalty to their principles, and were in great demand among European monarchs who hired them to participate in wars and defend their possessions. The Swiss mercenaries were distinguished by the fact that they did not obey any monarch and acted as independent brotherhoods, where each warrior received a share of the profits and did not serve the king or nobility, which made them extremely reliable and loyal to their comrades. In addition, during the same period, the first banking structures appeared in Switzerland, which were famous for the secrecy and reliable protection of clients' deposits, as well as independence from royal power, which attracted wealthy people from all over Europe to Switzerland who wanted to keep their savings safe. This gave rise to the hypothesis that it was the Templars who fled to Switzerland who could have laid the foundations for the future financial system, using their experience in managing money and establishing new rules of the game. However, there is no direct and convincing evidence that the Knights Templar actually found refuge in Switzerland, and this version remains just a beautiful theory, not supported by historical facts. But the very idea that the Templars continued their existence under a new guise, influencing the course of history and culture, does not lose its popularity and continues to stir the minds of people interested in the history of the order. More than 7 centuries have passed since the destruction of the Templar order, but their name has not been erased from history. On the contrary, it has become a symbol of courage, resilience, secret knowledge, and untold treasures. Conversely, the further the era of the Templars receded into the past, the more they were transformed into something more than just knights, endowed with supernatural abilities and attributed to their participation in conspiracies that changed the course of history. In the 19th century, Romantic writers began to write about the Templars as victims of a treacherous conspiracy unleashed by the French king and to idealize their image, portraying them as noble and honest warriors who fell victim to intrigue and betrayal. And in the 20th century, the Templars finally turned into a symbol of secret knowledge inaccessible to ordinary mortals and became associated with the search for the Holy Grail, with ancient mystical traditions, with Freemasonry, and with secret societies that control the world from the shadows. Their image has penetrated literature, cinema, and video games, turning into one of the main mysteries of world history and inspiring authors to create new works of art. In popular culture, the Templars appear sometimes as noble guardians of sacred knowledge, protecting secrets capable of changing the world, and sometimes as insidious conspirators seeking world domination and ready for any crimes to achieve their goal. Films such as Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, or books such as The Da Vinci Code, have made the Templars part of popular mythology and inspired people to search for treasures and unravel mysteries. And games like Assassin's Creed gave new life to the legend of the confrontation between the Templar Order and secret societies fighting for world domination. But why exactly have the Templars become the object of so many myths, legends, and conspiracy theories, attracting the attention of people from all over the world? Perhaps the reason lies in the fact that their disappearance was too abrupt, sudden, and mysterious, which gave rise to many questions and speculations that have not found answers in historical documents. Their arrest happened in one night, their wealth was never found, and their trace in history broke off too abruptly, leaving behind many mysteries. All this created the feeling that behind the official version of events there is something more, hidden from the eyes of the uninitiated. Stripping away the myths, legends, and conspiracy theories, their true legacy lies not in secret plots, mystical lore, or the quest for the Holy Grail, but in the principles and achievements they cultivated and passed on to the world, profoundly shaping the development of European civilization. Their expertise in financial transactions, the creation of an efficient system for money transfers and loans, and the principles of military discipline and the chivalric code of honor became integral to the advancement of European civilization, fostering progress and prosperity. Although the Knights Templar no longer exist as an organization, their name lives on in symbols, traditions, and cultural phenomena they left behind, reminding us of their courage, resilience, and dedication to their ideals. They began as humble warrior monks, protecting pilgrims in the Holy Land, but their legacy extended far beyond knighthood, significantly influencing the course of history and culture. They became a symbol of secret knowledge, strength, and power, and their story remains one of the most enigmatic and captivating chapters of the Middle Ages, continuing to stir people's imaginations and inspire them to seek new knowledge and discoveries.